Now that you've learned how to play complete paragraphs of Satie's Gnossienne No. 1, let's train you how to think ahead to the next section so that you are always ready for the next turning point in the structure of the music. Let's prime your mind by thinking about what the second section will be, the closing theme. Just play the beginning of it, and then even though you probably want to keep going, stop. We're not performing now, we're just priming your mind to think ahead and to have calm and secure transitions between sections. So just play the beginning of the closing theme and stop as soon as you're able. Keep that in your mind while we back up and try to take a running start, playing the beginning of the closing theme, preceding it with the portion of the A part. I'll start on phrase 2 of part A, the final repetition of phrase 2, in order to save time and to just practice my transition between part A and the closing theme. If you're not able to read music, then it can be hard to start in the middle, so just do what I do after I demonstrate. Doing that a couple of times can train you to think ahead to the closing theme, and whenever you play the final part A, phrase 2, you can be ready for what comes next. After you succeed at that a couple times and feel like you have your feet under you and you're getting more comfortable, I would recommend doing the whole part A and then stopping whenever you get to here. That way, whenever you play the first phrase 2, you can be sure not to take the off-ramp too soon to the closing theme. By practicing all of part A, you can remember that it is phrase 1A, 1B, 2, 1A, 1B, 2 before going to the closing theme. Now let's practice transitioning from part B into the closing theme. In order to save time, I won't start on the first phrase of part B, I'll start on the second. And then, because I already have the closing theme in my head from before, I'll just play the beginning of it in order to bind these two sections together. Don't insist on doing this a certain number of times correct. Just practice it until it becomes a little bit more comfortable. If you insist on doing it a certain number of times correct, like 10 times in a row or 5 times in a row, you may become so frustrated that you grow to hate the music. By emphasizing just a little bit of progress, you can get out of your practice session sooner, reduce frustration, and also leverage the growth that you'll achieve while sleeping. Focus on how many days you practice a certain transition or a certain part, not how many times you do it in a single day. By being more long-term in your thinking and by leveraging the power of sleep between practice sessions, you'll gain just as much progress in less time and with less frustration and with less possibility that you'll grow to hate the music by doing it too many times on any given day. Let's practice transitioning from part A prime into the closing theme. Whenever you have sections of the music that are repeated later but significantly altered, you'll see them sometimes written as A apostrophe. This is pronounced as A prime. Of course, if it was a B section that came back later in the piece and was significantly altered, it could be called B prime. But you'll see that apostrophe sometimes when you're looking at scholarly articles for the Western classical music tradition. Here is the end of part A prime going into the closing theme. In order to save more time and to challenge my brain, I'll even just do the very final simplification of part A prime phrase 1b. Because the music here says début de la pensée on the tip of the thought, then I take that potentially absurdist statement a little bit literally, and I play this part with a softer, mysterious, potentially hazy attempt at atmosphere. So I wanted to play more of the closing theme this time, so you could just hear that as the piece continues, sometimes I play the closing theme differently than other times. We've now practiced all of our transitions into the closing theme. We've started from the end of part A and gone into the beginning of the closing theme. We've started from the second phrase of part B and gone into the beginning of the closing theme. And we've done the very ending of part A prime and gone into the beginning of the closing theme. If you wanted to stitch the piece together even more tightly and more dependably, you could start from the end of each closing theme and think ahead to where you're about to go and practice those transitions as well. Let's start from the first instance of the closing theme, which is marked très luisant, very shining, another potentially absurdist performance indication. And I will be playing this section with the right hand louder than the left hand as much as I can, because with an indication like very shining, I'm imagining that that could potentially be taken quasi-literally to mean that the right hand could be louder than the left hand. If I play my left hand very loud, that won't sound very shining to me. That'll sound kind of boomy and rich and bassy. So I'm going to try to play this second phrase of the first closing theme with a right hand balance. And then I'll be going into part B, questionner, questioning. I'll be playing this questionner section with probably just a fragile softness, and perhaps I will soften as I ascend, like I mentioned in the melodic shaping episode. Just to think about my musicality now and to think about portraying the structure of the piece by having a little bit of variety and touch. Here we go with the first instance of the closing theme, second phrase, and then I will play part B. And to prime this transition, I'll play the beginning of part B just to get it in my mind before we back up and take a little bit of a running start. It didn't feel like it was in my mind very firmly, so I just played slowly to relax into it. Now I'll back up and take that running start to test my transition. If I were practicing, I would do that until it became a little more comfortable. Then I would leave and go on to practice something else, trusting that while I was sleeping tonight, my brain will be working on it and I will become better at this transition. Now let's move on to the second closing theme, and we're going to practice going from the second closing theme into part A prime with the super easy simplification. This section of the closing theme doesn't have a absurdist performing indication. It does just say forte, so I'll just be sure to play the second phrase of the closing theme loudly. I wanted to keep going since I was exploring the on the tip of the thought feeling. I slowed down a little for fun. I played quite softly, And I wanted to keep going, but in the interest of time, I'm focusing on learning my transitions right now, not on giving a performance. So I'm just gonna leave it. Of course, you should play until you feel a degree of improvement and then have the trust to leave yourself. Now that we have practiced our transitions from the closing theme into the different parts, I think I'll remind myself how the very final closing theme is by playing the second phrase of part B, where it's marked pas a pas, step by step. Here, because it's marked step by step, sometimes I drag the right hand, and sometimes I even try to desynchronize the right hand from the left hand and put a little bit of extra rubato in to feel like the right hand notes are going step by step, like the eighth notes might be a little tired or unsure of themselves, and just try to put a little bit of a different character to it. If you wanted to play the piece more objectively or more glacially or more calmly, you could leave out little touches like this, and it would still have a great effect because the piece is so incredibly mesmerizing. I'll play the second phrase of part B and then go all the way through the closing theme because I want to teach myself that when we have our final closing theme, it does end rather abruptly on the paper. Whenever it says sur la langue, on the tip of the tongue at the very end, I used to, as a joke with myself, take that absurdist performance indication semi-literally as well, and I would stick out my tongue a little bit while playing. Today I will probably just play rather softly so the abrupt ending doesn't seem so abrupt and any potential listeners would know that I am finishing my piece. You could not slow down if you wish and have an effect of waking up from a dream or shocking the listeners back into reality after being in a mystical state of mind. But multiple possibilities are there. Even though it doesn't say to slow down, it doesn't say to soften, you could add those touches on there based on your artistic intent. I'll now play the second phrase of the final statement of part B, and then all of the final closing theme in order to remember that I'll be transitioning into a closing theme which has fewer chords at the end and stops more suddenly. Good luck practicing all your transitions. If you can keep your head straight and your mind on the task while playing, you should be able to play the whole piece now. Good luck and happy practicing.